I got to talk a little bit about this before we get into anything else. So, if you're like me, you typically enjoy a cup of coffee in the morning, in the late morning, in the afternoon, as well as the mid-afternoon, and then the late afternoon, and then the evening, and then now. That's typically how it goes. But that being said, if you are a big fan of coffee, and many of us are, it turns out coffee could be powering our cars in the future. And this is interesting. This comes by way of a study out of Japan, and scientists in Japan have figured out a way specifically to enhance the performance of hydrogen fuel cells using caffeine. I'm not even joking. The same way you get a little bit of a pick-me-up in the morning, right, from your coffee, is the same thing that's going to power your hydrogen car that doesn't exist yet. But let's not focus on the little details there. But that being said, what they found is that specifically in the reaction in a hydrogen fuel cell, and I'm no chemist. I sit here and I talk on the radio, and I'm definitely not qualified to talk about chemistry, but platinum is one of the key items that's used in a hydrogen fuel cell. And we can break this down real quick. If you're unfamiliar with hydrogen fuel cars, right, we're not talking about cars that burn hydrogen, not hydrogen combustion. We're talking about hydrogen fuel cell, where it uses hydrogen to create electricity, and then that electricity goes into a battery pack, and then from the battery pack, it goes into an electric motor. And so that's what we're talking about. And essentially, that's the process that happens. A fancy, complicated thing happens in the hydrogen fuel cell, obviously using hydrogen as the fuel there. It has a separate hydrogen tank, which feeds hydrogen to the fuel cell. Magic, witchcraft, dark magic, whatever you want to call it, happens inside that fuel cell. And then electricity goes into the battery pack. And so what these researchers in Japan have come up with, which is using coffee, of all things. In Japan, they're known for liking things like canned coffee, among other things in Japan. But that being said, what they figured out is that they could use a very small amount of caffeine and put it on basically the surface of the platinum, again, one of the metals that is in the reaction process, and it boosted the it boosted the reaction process, they said, 11 times. So we're not even talking about a small percentage. No, they said it was 11 times. And that is interesting when you think about it. Now, does that mean 11 times the hydrogen or the electricity output? No, but 11 times the reaction happening in this part of the process doesn't quite equate to 11 times the actual power output. We're not quite there yet. But that being said, any little bit they can do to actually to improve the efficiency of this, especially when you can do it with something as cheap and available as caffeine. Caffeine is in all sorts of things, obviously. And I mean, I don't know if the researchers were just putting, pure caffeine in there. They said it was a small amount, or if, they just took their cup of coffee that was sitting there on the lab table and said, all right, we'll pour a little bit of that down there. But that being said, you probably shouldn't pour coffee in your fuel tank right now, not unless you've got a hydrogen fuel cell car. And I'm also not quite sure how you'd actually get it into the fuel cell. But let's not worry about the small details. But that does bring me on another tangent, which is, why don't we have more hydrogen cars? It's an interesting conundrum to me because, namely, we've got electric cars, which is already half of the way there, right? A hydrogen electric car, like I said, uses that hydrogen fuel cell to create electricity, to fuel a battery pack, to move an electric motor. And the idea being that you could essentially have an electric car that you could fill up instantly. So you get all of the instant torque of an electric vehicle, the things that electric vehicle nuts like to talk about and say, oh, it's so much better, right? You get those benefits, but you also get the benefit of a gas car, right? And you just fill it up right away. Boom, done. Easy, let's go. And I mean, there's a few. Toyota's been working on the Toyota Mirai, which is their hydrogen car. BMW's got one. I mean, we've seen manufacturers do it, but we haven't seen it come to the market. So it's one of those things we might talk about more in depth on a later show. because there are some things, I think, perhaps some political things influencing that. So we'll get into all of that and more. But after the break, don't go anywhere. We're talking about how speed cameras might have backfired on a town here in Colorado. Don't go anywhere. You're listening to Automotive ADHD, and it's right here.